we are going to, yes. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, let's take a poll. How many of you would like to start with the tangent graph? Our other option would be writing the equations of sine and cosine curves.
Is this kind of two roads? Which one's easier? Stop.
Well, we already started talking about tangent graph, didn't we? Okay. A tiny bit. Well, let's just finish up our graphing with tangent then. Okay, so let's finish up talking about tangent. We decided that since the tangent at pi over 2 is what? Undefined, which means graphically we have a asymptote at x equals pi over 2. Okay, I'm going to then talk about negative pi over 2. What's the tangent at negative pi over 2? Undefined. So we have another asymptote there. Now, I'm only going to talk about one piece of the graph. This is obviously going to repeat over and over and over again, just like our sine and cosine curves. Okay. So let's talk about what the curve actually looks like. What's the tangent of 0? 0. Okay. What I'm going to do is halfway between 0 and pi over 2 is pi over 4. And conveniently enough, the tangent of pi over 4 is very easy to calculate. What is the tangent of pi over 4? It's 1. And what is the tangent of negative pi over 4? Negative 1. So here is our tangent graph. Okay. This is our parent function. Okay. Now, a couple of things that are different. We still have 5 important things, but they're not all points. We have 3 points that I'm going to say are critical, and then instead of 5 points, we have 3 points and 2 asymptotes that you're going to have to draw. Okay. What's the distance between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2? Not 1 pi. Okay. So something else that's different is our period is pi instead of 2 pi because of where our asymptotes fall. Okay. So what does that mean? Okay. We're going to talk about the characteristics of a tangent graph that's been transformed, if you will. Okay. The tangent graph does not oscillate, so it does not have amplitude, but A is still going to help us determine the frame. Okay, if you look at my tangent graph right here, I have a frame drawn, and notice these 2 points that I said were critical lie on the frame. So we're still going to draw a frame for a tangent graph, but we do not say that it has amplitude. It has no amplitude. Okay, but A will still help us with our frame. Okay, on the edge of our frame, okay, will be our vertical asymptotes, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Most important thing, our period is pi divided by b. Since the tangent graph has a period of pi, if it has been transformed, we find our new period with pi divided by b. Sine and cosine, 2 pi divided by b. Tangent, pi divided by b. And then we still find our starting point the same. Okay. So on your blue sheet, You have the same instructions as far as steps go, except we have a few things that we needed to adjust. So the first thing I'd like you to do is you have two frames there. I'd like you to go ahead and split up your frames the same. You don't have one because. Okay, we are still going to draw our frame the same as we do for a sine or cosine curve. Okay. So split it in half lengthwise, and then split it into fourths. What do you notice about my frames up here? The starting point will be in the middle of your frame. That is another difference when we graph tangents. Okay, our starting point is in the middle of our frame. Okay, so when you draw a frame, we'll talk about the starting point being in the middle and how to draw it. But let's talk about once you have the frame. Okay. Well, let's talk about how to draw the frame. If our starting point's in the middle, okay, we're still going to go up and down the amplitude, correct? But how are we going to know how long to make it? How long should our frame be? The length of the period. So if our starting point's in the middle, how far do I know how to go over each way? Half of the period each way. Okay. And that should be written on your blue sheet, and we'll talk about it again on our next slide. So let's talk about the tangent graph if we have a positive A. On the outside of our frames, what are we going to draw? Okay, the asymptotes. So the asymptotes line up, they should line up with the edge of your frame. Okay. Then you have three critical points. One is the starting point. All right. And then we want to make this snake through, and it needs to be increasing. So one point's going to be in the top frame on this dotted line. The other point's going to be at the bottom of the frame on that dotted line. Notice how we use each piece of our frame, okay? And then this will just snake through. How about a tangent with a negative A? Will the negative change our asymptotes? No. Okay. We're still going to have a point in the middle, but then what's going to be different? It should fall, so I should have points here and here. All right, so you are obviously first going to identify the amplitude, period, and starting point. Well, there is no amplitude, so let's say you're going to identify A. The period is slightly different, pi over b instead of 2 pi over b. Okay. To construct the frame, we'll plot the starting point. We'll go up and down A. And then since the starting point's in the middle, we're going to put half of our period to the right, half of the period to the left. Okay. We'll sketch our graph. Instead of 5 critical points, we're going to have 3 critical points and 2 asymptotes. Okay. And then right here I say state the range. Why am I just talking about the range and not domain and range? There's asymptotes over and over, right? So our tangent, our domain is broken up with an infinite number of asymptotes. I'm not going to make you write that, okay? But we will talk about the range. What's the range of our parent graph? All real numbers. What's the range of any tangent graph going to be? All real numbers, okay? There's 80.3 right there. Okay. So let's practice graphing a tangent graph. We don't say that a tangent graph has amplitude, but we do need to identify A. What is A? 2. We then need our period. We calculate the period by taking pi divided by b. And what is b? So our period is pi. Our starting point, C over B. What's our C value? What? There is not a C value, so it's 0. And what's our D value? 3. All right, so we have everything we need. Okay. So our starting point is 0, 3. Our frame, how do we draw our frame from our starting point? Let's talk about our A value. What do we do with our A value? We need to go up and down our A value. So we need to go up 2 and down 2. Okay? So that's how tall our frame is going to be. It's going to stretch from 1 to 5. How far over do I need to draw my frame? Okay, we don't take the period both ways because our frame needs to have a length of the period. So since our period is pi, it's going to stretch to the right how much? Pi over 2. And it's going to stretch to the left. Pi over 2.
So it's total.
Correct. Our frame needs to total the length of the period. So we're going to go half each way. Okay. Then same thing, we need to cut our frame in half lengthwise and then into fourths. So what's halfway between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2? 0. What's halfway between 0 and pi over 2? Pi over 4. And halfway between 0 and negative pi over 2? All right, I'm going to draw my asymptotes first. I think you should draw your asymptotes first. That way you know where to fit your curve in. All right, so your asymptotes are going to fall on the edges of your frame. I would like you to label the asymptotes. They are lines. So this is x equals pi over 2, and this is x equals negative pi over 2. Now we can draw in our curve. Okay. Where is the first point we should put? Starting point, right? Starting point is a point for us. Okay. I put the one on this dotted line? At the top of our frame. What about this dotted line? The bottom. And then we can draw our snake here. Okay. I do want you to label these 3 points. So this is the point negative pi over 4, 1. This is the point 0, 3. And this is the point pi over 4, 5. And what's our range? All real numbers. Any questions? Do you think these are easier? Okay. All right, so let's talk about, you're going to have 2 tangent graphs this weekend. That's it. Did you write them down yesterday? Okay, these are the 2 that you're going to graph today along with your worksheet. Okay? So write them down if you didn't. These are what you're going to graph along with your worksheet. Now what we're going to talk about now is going from a sine or cosine graph to the equation. In my opinion, this is easier than graphing. Okay? If you know how to graph, and I think it's because we know how to graph. And so going backwards, okay, it won't be so bad. All right? So let's see what that looks like. Does everyone have this written down? Okay. So we're going to find an equation given a graph. What do we need to know in order to be able to graph a sine or cosine? All right, we need to know the amplitude, which we get by looking at A, right? How do we find the period? 2 pi divided by B. What else do we need? Okay, our starting point, we take C over B, D. There's one more thing that we do look at. Back up here. Okay, we need to know whether A is positive or negative because that tells us if we have a reflection or not, right? Right? So if we find these 3 things, we can graph our sine or cosine curve. So what we're going to have to be able to do is identify these 3 things from our graph in order to get A, B, C, and D. Okay? So here's an example of what you might see. All right? So first of all, is this a sine or cosine curve? This is a cosine curve. All right. What I would do is I would draw in your frame. There's our frame, right? So let's first look at the amplitude. What is the amplitude? The amplitude is 2. Do you agree? All right. Is this a reflection or not? No. So we know that A is a positive 2. Next, what is the period of our graph? 2 pi over 3. We start at 0. Our frame stops at 2 pi over 3. Okay? How do we find the period if we know B? Okay. So 2 pi over 3 should be the same as 2 pi divided by B. What's B? Third thing, what's our starting point? False. What? Remember, our starting point is the starting point of our frame. Okay, so go to the left side of your frame and it's that middle point. Okay, for a cosine curve, that's not where the cosine starts. Okay, so our starting point is 0, 0. So what does that mean about C and D? C and D are both 0. Okay, now we have A, B, C, and D. We can write the equation of our curve. Y equals A is 2 cosine of B is 3x. Okay, any questions? All right, let's try another one. Draw on my frame. Okay. Sine or cosine? Sine. What is our amplitude? 4. Okay. Which means A is -4. We have a reflected sine graph, don't we? Okay. Good. Our period is what? Goes from 0 to 2, so our period is 2. We find that by taking 2 pi divided by b. Solve for b. How do we do that? This is pi, isn't it? Okay. Great. Our starting point is where? 0, 2, right? Here's the frame. My middle of the frame is here. That is where the sine curve starts. Okay? So we're at 0, 2, which means C is, D is 2. So our curve, y equals -4 sine of pi x, and then after it is plus 2. So far so good? Not so bad? We're going to progress to, and that's a little bit more tricky. Sine or cosine? Has it been reflected?
Yes.
Okay. What is our amplitude? Say it louder. Our amplitude is 2, which makes A -2. What is our period? How are we supposed to figure out our period? Okay. From here to here, we have a distance of pi over 2. From here to here, we have a distance of pi over 6. So we need to add pi over 6 and pi over 2. What is pi over 6 plus pi over 2? 4 pi over 6. So 2 pi over 3. Are we all in agreement? So if our period is 2 pi over 3, that needs to equal 2 pi over b. What is b? 3. Okay. Our starting point, what is it? Here's our frame. Good, middle of our frame. Negative pi over 6, 0. Okay, now d is 0, that's fine, but how do we get the x value here? It should be c over b, correct? So c over b should equal negative pi over 6. What is b though? We know b, don't we? B is 3. So if I multiply 3 over to this side, what does that make c? Mm-hmm. 1/2, right? Still negative. Okay. So our equation would be, a was -2. -2 cosine of bx minus c. So this is 3x plus pi over 2. Because we want that shift to go to the left, so that needs to be 3x plus pi over 2. You don't forget to make your c opposite when you put it back in your equation. I'll give you an option. One more example. Are you done? You can think about that one if you want to. But I think you're okay without it. Okay, so you have your